while our economy is predominantly built on extractive industries and servicing extractive industries and mineral resources underground, I've always felt that South Africa has the biggest resource, which is its people. And if you think about the apartheid system and separation and systemic exclusion, our biggest injustice has been that the people of South Africa haven't had an equal opportunity to equitable education and good quality education. Because if we were to do that in a more sustainable way, we would be unearthing the potential in all of our citizens such that we can become that globally competitive globally competitive nation that is a goal that we've set for ourselves in the preamble of our Constitution.
Welcome back to Integral Voices, convened and produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. Today's episode features a conversation in advance of the 2024 African Integral Conference titled Solidarity in Crisis. What can we learn about development from the African context? Thanks for listening.
Welcome, everyone, to another Integral Voices conversation, which is produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. Among us today on this panel are 5 colleagues in addition to myself. We will introduce ourselves briefly before we launch in. Our topic today is inspired by the second Integral African Conference, and we wanted to have a conversation about what this conference is about. We're hoping to embody what this conference will embody. I noticed this word "about" showing up, and part of the challenge is to get underneath it and around it, so we are not simply speaking about things, but speaking in ways that are, as Paddy would say, an enactment of our being and becoming. So I'll invite others now to take a minute to say some words about themselves and the work you do, how your work relates to our intentions for this conversation. And Vusi, I'll go to you first.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Aftab, and hello, colleagues. And I'm Vusi Vilagati, based in Johannesburg, and I am an African consciousness researcher, leadership consultant, and learning and development practitioner. My work spans in a number of sectors that I've consulted in, and I've also, in my life, served as a priest in a religious community. So the intersections of values and humanity, and thinking about how we change society in ways that are collective and organized around shaping better human beings, are core to my well-being and my thinking and movement. So thank you for being part of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the conference as well.
Molweni, good day. My name is Luvuyo Matasa. I'm the executive director at Reimagine SA. It's a public benefit organization focused on finding ways of working with various different actors in society to drive engagements that are rooted in Ubuntu and African wisdom that enhances the quality of each citizen's life and looks to unlock the potential of each person we engage with. I've been, for some years, intrigued by how the international community interacts not only with South Africans in the urban areas, but also impacts the lives of people in our far-flung rural and underdeveloped communities. And I'm looking forward to the conference and learning about all the different ways that the practitioners and colleagues are doing human better, and today's conversation of us just driving the work and the humanity we look forward to.
Thank you, Luvuyo. Noting the term doing human better. And over to you, Ruan.
Thank you, Aftab. It's good to be here with everyone tonight, or today in some spaces. I am an organizational development practitioner. I was working for an organization called Mandala Consulting, based in Johannesburg as well. The director of business development for the company, but I see myself mostly as a group process facilitator, and I assisted with the previous Integral African Conference, putting it all together, and again with this second one, we are very excited to be hosting it in Africa once again this year, and I'm just all ears and happy to be here and engage with everyone tonight for the purpose.
Welcome, Ruan, and over to you, Patty.
Thank you, Aftab, and delighted to be with all of you in this conversation. I'm the founding member and CEO of the Integral African Institute, which we are developing and growing, and of the Coaching Center. Also, with Dumi, founder member of the Ubuntu Coaching Foundation. And I need to say something about how we see coaching. For us, coaching has been an interesting intersection in which I and my colleagues and faculty have developed a program that we've been running for now nearly 21 years of humaning better, of how do we human better, how do we work. I work in the same spaces as all of you that have mentioned, the relational spaces and the organizational space, but in helping individuals and teams and cultures shift in a way of living in that relational space and being able to have the conversations that matter, and the conversation towards say, I see you, in the real expression of Sawubona, and all that you are and have been and will become. And yeah, bringing that interface between these splits in the world into a place where we can kind of live more through the heart and the soul.
Thank you, Patty. To say a few words about myself, I serve as the president of Meridian University. This is a graduate-only university with programs in psychology, education, and business. We think of all of our programs in one way or another as educating developmental practitioners. Approaching the education of developmental practitioners by integrating informational learning, which happens at graduate schools, but in this case, integrating informational learning with transformative learning, which is unusual, at least, not typical. Launching then into our conversation and the underlying question, which Luvuyo and others pointed to in the phrase, doing human better. We are struggling as a species, at least at the level of the system world. There is deep crisis. Not all local worlds are in crisis, but most are. If you could give us our departure point in terms of the value of African consciousness, African culture, how might we draw on it to do human better?
Thank you, Aftab. I think there's a number of strands, and in Southern Africa there's the wonderful concept of Ubuntu. Patty has made reference to that, which is a collection of values. I mean, itself. If you go to the East, you could be talking about Ujamaa, which is a cooperative economics a view of life. And then those that want to go to some of the earliest African empires, they could derive M.I.T and Sankomfa as way of having dialogue about what it means to be human together. In by and large, in the African psyche and the ways and the cosmology, there are many connections. There's an ecosystemic view of the world that connects tightly with integral thought, that connects tightly with some of the thinking that is behind the conference. So the invitation for me, if I were to say, if you look at the base of all of these values, there is solidarity, there is humanness, there is a common belonging, there is a shaping of a world where the resources and the people, the individual, the community, the team in a boardroom, and whoever else can latch onto these values to begin to think about what does it mean to do this community of being in relationship with each other and with the resources of the world in a better way where every human being can flourish. I think at the heart of it, for me, that is what I often summarize it as: we think about what is hurting Africa. If you think about that, you are conscious about Africa's needs. And then you think about what are the cries in Africa's heart. And you think about all of the things that Africa is yearning for. And how do you live to deliver those hopes in Africa's heart? So I often would summarize it that way when I have conversations. But I think it's for me, what is Africa crying for? And the answer to that is the values that underpin the humanity that we can be together. And we start here and flourish across the world.
So on this journey of togetherness and the fact that we could do that better, that we could do togetherness better, that we see this term solidarity actually is not used that much in most contexts. What does it feel like? What does it look like if the five of us were to deepen our solidarity, even in this moment? What would that look like? Can you make a move with us, so to speak, that catalyzes solidarity amongst us?
One of the best ways that I would think this comes alive for me, it is if you're really wanting to have an impact, and you meet with a team, it would be just to probably even just sit in this room and ask, Paddy, where were you born? Luvuyo, where were you born? And in this telling of the stories about where I've come from, there are so many places of discovering the way that Paddy has become, the way that Ruan has become. In the story of that, there is what we call a form of positionality, understanding where I've come from and where I am going in relation to others. And often in the threads of sitting around the circle, when you're in African context, oftentimes when you tell the stories, you sit in that indaba format of a circular around a tree if you're in a village, and then each person tells a story of their humanity. And we come out of that place with both laughter and tears, joy, but there is a common holding of each other's sense of being. When a person has told you their story, there is often something that connects you that's more human than the color of skin, than the color of hair, than whether that person is young or old. But there's something that gives you something of their heart that you can hold and walk with them into the future with. So that's solidarity. In the most practical way in African cultures, there's the use of this word solidarity in terms of solidarity with those that are here, solidarity with those that have gone before us, and solidarity that are those behind us. So we live with what we have now, with respect for those that have gone before us, and in honoring those that have gone before us, and in respect for the generations to come. There's no sustainability metaphor bigger than that for me, that I live with what I have as a gift to the future generations. And that consciousness, if it were able to move in an individual, in families, in communities, in countries, it would change the world.
The gift must move on and keep moving on. So, Patty, where were you born, and what else could you tell us in the next minute or two that will give us, that will bring us into where you come from?
I was born in a mining town close to Johannesburg. And those of you who know it will know what that brings with it. But I lived close to a mine, and one of the most stirring and deeply powerful parts of the mine was hearing the mine workers over the weekend drumming and singing. And from my bedroom window as a young girl, I would be listening to this and somehow being called in the very soul of my being to something that was stirring in me. And yet, as you know, in the life that we grew up in, this horrid division, we weren't permitted. It was, the separations, and it spurred me starting the Human Relations Club at age 16, because I couldn't understand the horror in human beings at that age, even younger, as to what kept us apart. When I could feel the stirring of something beyond the words or the secrets that were kept, the secrets. I also just want to share that the other day, I've always known this, but I haven't felt it in my body so much, as grappling with a sense of betrayal. I wondered how, why things, when people have a sense of betrayal around me, I get triggered quite strongly. And I was thinking about how I felt betrayed by the government that we were under at that stage, when everything inside of me told me there was an untruth, but we were told a different truth. That was incredibly powerful at my ripened age to again feel that stirring again. So that's part of where I come from.
Apartheid wounded everyone. Patty, just a bit more on, so you're hearing the miners sing together. Just a bit more on how that, as you look back, how is that affecting you as a young soul?
As a young soul still, I think I am still a young soul. On my journey to becoming a wise soul. It was a calling. I felt an affinity with something that I didn't belong to, or said I was told I didn't belong to. But felt the belonging. And I suppose, when Vusi, you talk of hearing the story, for me, the approach we have to training and working with people to heal across various spectrums of life is around having that conversation of listening someone into their wisdom. But in that relational space, how do you hear the story? How do you actually listen to and get out of the way of the story that is willing to be told or waiting to be told? And I think there was a story, there was a very pregnant story. And again, linking, what is hurting South Africa and what are we yearning for? That yearning and that hurting is, I hope, is bringing us closer into that heartfelt space of sitting down and connecting.
Thank you, Patty. Luruyo? Vusi opened the door and Patty has walked through it.
So herein lies the trick of what's the first step when walking through, right? So where was I born? I was born in Durban, South Africa, and born in the township hospital. So if you think of the dynamic that Patty's just touched on, and you had hinted on the space of the apartheid history, this was townships, if you can appreciate, they were communities that were built close enough to the urban hubs during apartheid so that the labor that had come from the rural areas was close enough to be at work, and by nightfall, far enough to be out of sight and not heard. So I was born in a township called Claremont in South Africa. In Durban. And I was born in Waterberg Clinic. And I always share that my life experiences were very different, I can almost guarantee, with the children who were probably born in the beds right next to me. I have had a very interesting life journey that has taken me through what South Africa calls Model C schools, and through being interested in basketball, got an opportunity to study in the United States and return back to South Africa. Now, this interaction with a local community and a local wrong, where your skin color determined your trajectory in life, having an opportunity to study abroad and being exposed to, within the context of the different schools that I went to, where merit and potential and all the things that human development should be focused on, had me very interested in what South Africa has to offer the world. And it's interesting that Patty has touched on a mining, growing up in a mining town, while our economy is predominantly built on extractive industries and servicing extractive industries and mineral resources underground. I've always felt that South Africa has the biggest resource, which is its people. And if you think about the apartheid system and separation and systemic exclusion, our biggest injustice has been that the people of South Africa haven't had an equal opportunity to equitable education and good quality education. Because if we were to do that in a more sustainable way, we would be unearthing the potential in all of our citizens such that we can become that globally competitive globally competitive nation that is a goal that we've set for ourselves in the preamble of our Constitution. So that's where I was born. The life experience has led me to the work that we do at Reimagine SA. And it's about convening these conversations that help actors in society, in different spaces in society, try and understand how do we engage in ways and try and find ways of empowering people to take charge of their agency and take charge of the future they want to create and make the best of this democracy that we've enjoyed for the last 30 years, so that it's no longer a theory and is something that people can say that they see themselves in the society that we are building together.
Thank you, Luroyo. And I'm hoping we'll come back to the question of what, in a more concrete way, what South Africa can offer the world, and what is unique about gathering in South Africa in the first week of October, and what kind of solidarity that forms that enables us to engage in various kinds of sustained and sustaining conversations and collaborations and projects that could result from such a gathering. I was born at the Holy Family Hospital in Karachi, Pakistan. A group of Catholic sisters from the U.S. founded the hospital. It's still there. My uncle, my mother's brother, eventually became the medical director of that hospital. I also, my mother worked for the United Nations Development Program, so I also grew up in India and Turkey and Hawaii. So, but still, what was deeply formative for me was witnessing the poverty in Karachi and Mumbai, with people living on the streets. And I would say that affected me, and I would even say wounded me, perhaps in ways that have some parallels with being wounded by apartheid, even if one is on the privileged side of the chasm, and shapes my work as a developmental practitioner now as well. Staying with the lived intention of solidarity, Usi, will you tell us a little bit more about where you come from, and then just make another move with us that we begin to embody the intention of solidarity?
I was born not in South Africa. I was born in Swaziland, just a village outside of Manzini, one of the industrial towns. And I was born in a very small village, and in this village, although they had to travel about 50 kilometers to the hospital where I was actually born in Baban, but because my grandfather worked in a warehouse there, but that's where I was born. And then I think with starting school, then I had to move to live in town, and many years later, I'm in my 20s, I'm here in South Africa. And my life has made a number of moves. One of the most impactful ones is being part of the youth movement that was key to really driving some of the transformational changes in South Africa. It could have been the birth of the democracy, but thereabout was part of the youth councils, Swaziland Council of Churches, South African Council of Churches, All Africa Conference of Churches, and we were dealing with the conversations about liberation theology, the liberation of the countries, and all of those things first made me move into being a priest. And then I have moved into many other sectors, and that I've moved through, but there are core streams in my thinking that have shaped me. Touching poverty, and as a youth worker, being able to build a real house for a human being that you find without a house, and seeing a house built and building it with your own hands and making it come into being. For me, that was amongst the very first things that, and in one way or another, I have always wanted to be part of communities and moments that make real change, that change somebody's life in realistic and authentic terms. So I've given myself into that. Then sometimes I've asked, what does it mean for a child to be born in the rural area, not in the center of Johannesburg, or not in Sandton in Johannesburg? What does it mean for a child to be born in Mumbai, not in Silicon Valley? So those kinds of questions keep me alive in terms of my agency. And so I am preoccupied by what can make Africa better, and how can African leaders change, and how can Africans embody that kind of agency. How have some African leaders betrayed the very humanity that they claim to be their values? So some of those kind of questions charge my imagination. It's interesting, Aftab, to say to the fact that we asked the question, where were you born? But the answers to the question have included when were you born? Because in those, there is a sense in which we are locating ourselves in history. Paddy located herself in history, and each of us located ourselves in history. And I think, for me, that is what it means to ground what we know in reality. The grounding of what we know and who we are, the becoming happens when we can locate ourselves with authentic kind of communities and realities around us, being touched by another story. Let me make one move. Aftab, in what ways are you poor? In what ways are you rich? In what ways? In what ways am I poor? I am poor because I live in Johannesburg in a fenced-up property that I have very limited interactions with my neighbors. And I am fearful because of crime. I'm suspicious of the people that pass by our gated community spaces. I am poor because of that, because it censors my sense of freedom and humanity. And it makes me curious about why, when someone stands for a long time outside our fence, what are they doing there? And yet they are a human being like me. I am poor. And I am rich because I have been exposed. I have knowledge. I have learned. I've been touched by so many human beings in the spaces that I've functioned, that my humanity is rich, and I could offer something else to other human beings in conversation.
Thank you, Vusi. And we could proceed through the door of the second question. So in terms of blessings, blessed with family and the solidarity of family, blessed with clan. However, the clan is in a diaspora on four continents. with a WhatsApp thread, being held by a WhatsApp thread. So it's not a strong thread. And then I'm blessed with the solidarity of having been at Meridian University for the last 30 years. And many of my colleagues have been here the whole time as well. So there's the solidarity of that that comes from that kind of the difficult journey, learning journey that it's been. There's a lot that we can laugh about, having gotten through. Then I would say beyond that, I am impoverished, both in terms of the local world that I live in Southern California and Los Angeles, and in Northern California, about an hour, 1 to 2 hours north of San Francisco, depending on traffic. That I would characterize both of these local worlds as deeply in the squalor of postmodernity, a different kind of squalor, where solidarity is not only missing, but the idea of solidarity is missing.
I love that question, Busi. And this, in similar ways, I am both poor and rich in what both of you have expressed. And I'm noting that where I am rich is in the relational field. And even now, as I'm feeling into all four of us being on the call and the two that aren't on the call, I'm being enriched by this relational space and by the allowing of a heart that in some ways felt quite protective and angry around how my upbringing was and the way I found myself located in the world and everyone else located in the world, in a madness, a kind of sanity, which Aftab, you're speaking of in this post, the squalor. And the squalor of the mind is what comes to me, and I keep getting so surprised at that poverty. I'm aware and moved at every corner of every street that you come to, because we cannot turn away in our country in any way. I think it's hard to pretend anymore that the whole of us do not exist in some way. I mean, we really are turning in such an obvious way, turning away from each person on the corner of the street into something that is known and familiar and that we can escape to. And I find myself doing that. And yet I'm left justifying certain things because I can't relate in certain ways, and I'm tired, I'm stressed, and me comes up in that space, and I find I go into that poverty of idea as well, and the poverty of generosity. And I just want to go back to another image of what was so beautiful, in a bit of a romantic space for me, of traveling around South Africa and meeting the rural people and working with them in many ways, and the generosity of acceptance, whether you were a stranger or not. You were just accepted into a home and accepted to stay or accepted to eat or engaged with. So my work is constantly in trying to notice and not shy away from the ways in which we are poor, impoverished by our current system and the past, and hold into the hope of the richness of what I also know can be there into the future.
I would say, and thank you, Pervose, for this inquiry, right? I would say I am rich and poor on different sides of the same coin. I am I'm deeply troubled by, and if I could rephrase it this way, I'm deeply troubled by how obvious the solutions to our problems are and how much time is spent appeasing in order to get points across. So that deeply troubled, and that weighs on me heavily every day. I am equally energized, and this would be the richness, by how many layers of efforts, dynamic approaches, conversations that I'm exposed to, that I'm aware of, that is a network of networks building the energy and the tipping point of what we need to overcome this inertia that we keep finding ourselves stuck in. When I reflect on the different elements that are shared, we are so time poor because our attention is split by so many different urgent priorities. And I think in spending deep amounts of time trying to understand and get our heads around these conversations and how they translate to meaningful, sustained action is an important space to be in. But as a young person, or one of the chronologically younger, I know that Patty spoke about a youthful soul, I'm impatient with the need to keep on finding each other in conversation. So the question of rich and poor, I would say I'm rich in family. I have a wonderful support structure. I'm energized by the prospect and future of young twin boys, and equally running out of time because they don't stop growing, and we don't seem to be finding one another with the sense of urgency that we need to overcome the challenges that we are faced.
Luvuyo, if we were to go further on your point about whether conversations turn into meaningful action together. So the four of us, and Rowan and Rika, we'll all be at the conference. In fact, all six of us were at the last conference in 2019. I know that I'm still in contact and have had some recent collaboration with Dumi, who we all know, and who works closely with Patty, and then also Jay Naidu, who will, my understanding is, not be at the conference physically, but he will come in. He will Zoom in. So, in a way, this conference in about 5 weeks is a meaningful action that we are engaging in together. And shall we move this conversation now towards that? What would it mean? What is the how that we could begin to articulate and imagine to move this conference to a whole other depth of solidarity. I met at least another half a dozen people in 2019 that I am not in contact with, and wish I was. Just as an example of what could have grown out of the conversations at the conference that did not. And in fact, I would say this is true of most conferences that I've been at. Actually, I got to know Patty better, not through conferences, and we've been in several conferences together, but because Patty arranged for about 4 or 5 of us to stay together in someone's home for a few days. And our conversations continued in that context. This was after the last 2019 conference in outside of Johannesburg. So what would be the medicine of solidarity that can be put into motion in our conversation today at the conference itself?
So if we talk about the medicine of solidarity, and earlier while we were preparing for the conversation, we were talking about the responsibility that many of us who've been navigating the dynamic of urban, peri-urban, global, local, rural, serviced, underserviced, we find ourselves needing to translate different languages to be relatable, different terms into different languages to be accessible and relatable. So if I think of solidarity, I think of isintu, and I think of ubuntu. So solidarity in the sense of isintu is what you've just spoken about in terms of how you and Paddy connected beyond the actual conference, right? The conference was, this congruence of all these activities, energies, focus, agendas, priorities. But in that space where you're then connecting as people, you got to know each other better. You got to understand what the priorities are. In isintu and ubuntu, it's always about what do you bring to the table to enhance the other's humanity? How do we make this experience of being human together better? And when you mention the work that you're doing Aftab at Meridian, that work, and you mentioned who this conversation is going to go out to. We have networks available to ourselves and each other. And it becomes, when we think about what are we bringing to the table to make isintu and ubuntu better, it's those networks and being intentional about how then do they advance the work that we're doing? How then do they impact the communities and people we're touching, such that the conversations that are due to happen at the conference don't stay at the conference? The biggest tragedy we could have is we have a 3-day session of navel gazing and walk away, patting ourselves on the back. Whereas we can have, a space where papers will be shared, experiences will be elaborated on, and it's about each of us then thinking, if it's meaningful, if it's moving, the work that I've just heard about, how do I help advance it and take it to the next step? Because that's essentially the end goal. We're convening to compare notes. We're convening to learn from each other. But I think the magic happens when we convene to see how we can elevate one another's work.
And so, Luvuyo, how do we convene for solidarity? What the how? We are at, like any conference, we are at risk because the structure of conferences, the how we structure conferences predisposes our behavior and how the habits of our hearts move us through those 3 days. So, like any conference, our gathering in 5 weeks is also at risk.
A sense of intentionality. So that question that Vosi had asked, and I know that as a matter of practicality and sometimes efficiency or convenience, whatever you'd like to call it, we tend to convene in work streams. And it's almost becoming an echo chamber, right? It's the same school of thought having the same conversations and almost reaffirming one another's theories and approaches to the same agenda that we all have. So how then do we become intentional about breaking down these silos and creating that melting pot where whatever the activity may be, it becomes intentional about learning from and being influenced by all three spaces that will be coming together in the conversation. And of course, there are many more, but it's the three streams that have been touched on. So that would be the one part. The other, which is an approach that we speak to, but I'm sure each of our spaces have comparable steps that take, is co-discovery. So Vosi asked us, where you from? Where you born? We all come into these spaces with stories, but we almost suspend them for the sake of getting the paper across the line, the keynote address across the line, and we forget to tell each other and one another the journey we've traveled to get here, because there is value in that, because they are elements and stories that we are unaware that are important to tell. So I think it goes back to that intentionality. And without overloading the 3 days, it's making sure that we're bringing these three streams, these three spaces closer together so that there is learning exchange and not necessarily a pulling in different directions unintentionally.
You know, Luvio, I'll be very interested to hear from people who do watch this recording if they found it interesting as I'm finding being immersed in this conversation with you three. How compelling will it be to listen? Because for me, most panel conversations are not compelling. That there is some sense of that the speakers are walking by each other. I'm not experiencing that here. Is that because I'm immersed in it, or because we, going through the door Vusi pointed to, we shifted the default habits around how we speak, how we connect on a panel? Patty, I'm noticing your thoughtful eyes.
I'm so with you. You know, in the keynote speakers, what my wish is that not only with the keynote speakers, but certainly that nobody is positioning themselves as anything other than a human being experiencing something in a particular way and sharing that experience with others, without the advocation of more of an invitation, more of a sharing and not taking position, so that we all are not in streams, but we are in stream together and with each other. And I love what you're saying, Lavoya. It's, I think one of the later stage capacities for us as human beings is going back And I have, when I say going back, I think going back into the essence of what we have left behind as human beings when we were able to gather and be around a fire and be able to have the time to actually look each other in the eyes and go, I've got time to hear your story. I'm not trying to get somewhere else. I'm not trying to respond online. I'm like, yeah, I think we all know that space. I think there's something around the structure of Aftab. You have created a different kind of structure, and we have all responded in that openness into that field. And it's in that field that we meet, not in the sphere that we meet. It's I would love to see that we get time together to come and, yes, be interested in what we're interested in, and then come back to share the medicine of each of those in a conversation that is as spacious as we're finding, well, as I'm finding this one, and I think we're all finding it. Impatience or point of view or wish I could or whatever it is. I'm feeling a drumming. I'm feeling that drumming again. I'm hearing a different drum. You know, it's not that sad, plaintive. Oh, whatever I was hearing then. This is a drum, a different kind of calling.
We're almost at the top of the hour here for our conversation. Lucy, what kind of drumming are you hearing at this time?
So I wanted to go back to the drum and the dance and around the fire. I do hope that the conference, that as we sit around the circle of the fire, that we will each have a moment to share experiences in the way that we configure the spaces that are there, spaces for story, for each one of us to dance into the music that they're singing every day, in the way they're changing the lives of communities like Luvuyo and many others that will be at the conference. I'm hoping for that. So that's the one metaphor that we each have that moment. Then the second metaphor I have is there is a friend that uses the metaphor of collecting bicycles, that conferences are like people go there to collect as many new bicycles that they can take home and pack and say, I have another new collection. May it be a tilting that we actually ride and learn to ride this bicycle into the real spaces and help each other ride into the spaces. As I speak, may our coming together in conversation, in presentations, that I am inviting more of a journey into the real world. If I come from whatever part of the world, can I invite people into where that world is heading and how are we really creating some deep forms of solidarity with the communities and people, and really decoding knowledge and theory and everything, and just diving into experience and evoking hope and humanity together.
Thank you, Husi. And Luvuyo, your closing thoughts?
We talk drumming beats, we're talking music. I'd like to borrow from the analogies that Vusi was sharing earlier and touch on frequency. So in terms of the African practice of calling totems and praise names, it's tapping into a frequency of a time before, an identity before, invoking the ancestors to be present and walking with us on a journey as we landscape the way forward. So if we can all then tap into that frequency, enjoy the drum beat and the music, connect with one another on this journey that we're taking forward.
Thank you, Luvuyo. And some final closing thoughts, Patty, from you. as the co-convener of the last conference.
May we meet each other anew. May we be able to create a story that can live on. May our token become something together that can say we took action.
Thank you, Patty. The first prayers in the Rift Valley might have been songs. We will co-create this conference while disrupting the modernist habits of conferencing. Very good to be with you, and see you soon in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Integral Voices is produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. All episodes are available at meridianuniversity.edu/integral voices. For more information about Meridian, including upcoming public courses, other podcasts, and information sessions, visit meridianuniversity.edu. See you next time.